The rumors began quietly, whispered across studio lots and fan magazines, that Alan Alda, the soul of MASH, had grown to despise his co-star Gary Burghoff. To the public, it was unthinkable. On screen they were Hawkeye and Radar, the perfect pair of heart and humor, symbols of the compassion that defined the show. But behind the scenes, as the laughter faded and long nights on set grew heavier, something shifted. Fame had made MASH a phenomenon, but it also became a pressure cooker. Alda's perfectionism met Burghoff's fragile sensitivity, and what began as creative friction quietly hardened into distance. Crew members sensed the tension, but the cameras never betrayed it. Each episode glowed with warmth, masking the wear and fatigue that had settled deep beneath their smiles. Years later, when both men finally spoke of those days, the truth that emerged wasn't one of hatred. It was one of exhaustion, misunderstanding, and ultimately, quiet respect. What seemed like animosity was, in truth, the growing pain of two artists carrying the weight of something far larger than themselves. When MASH first aired in 1972, television had never seen anything quite like it. Adapted from the 1970 film, it balanced irreverent comedy with the brutal honesty of war. At its center stood two figures whose chemistry carried the show's beating heart. Alan Alda as the brilliant, sarcastic surgeon Hawkeye Pierce, and Gary Burghoff as the innocent, soft-spoken Radar O'Reilly. From the first table read, their connection was undeniable. Alda's sharp intellect met Burghoff's warmth, and together they shaped a world where humor became a shield against despair. Off-camera, the tone was just as electric. Alda quickly emerged as the show's moral compass, insisting that every episode carry truth beneath its laughter. Burghoff, younger and deeply sensitive, watched him with a mixture of admiration and awe. For a time they worked like brothers, Alda pushing scenes toward emotional honesty, Burghoff grounding them with humanity. What audiences saw on screen was genuine trust, a kind of synchronized heartbeat that made the chaos of war feel survivable. The success came fast. Within months, MASH transformed from a modest ensemble into a cultural force. Letters poured in from doctors, veterans, and families who saw their own stories reflected through the surgeons of the 4077th. Alda became the face of that empathy. Burghoff became its spirit. Together they turned satire into solace, proof that comedy could tell the truth about suffering. But with acclaim came weight. Scripts grew longer. Shooting days stretched late into the night, and perfection became expectation. Alda's ambition for meaning never wavered. He wanted each line to matter. Burghoff, though gifted, began to feel the toll of the constant pressure. His quiet nature sometimes clashed with Alda's restless drive. Neither man intended harm. They were simply wired differently, both trying to protect the same fragile miracle the show had become. Those early years were filled with laughter that masked exhaustion. Between takes, Alda debated script changes, while Burghoff retreated to find calm. It wasn't rivalry, it was rhythm. One man fueled by control, the other by intuition. Their differences gave their scenes texture, tension, and life. When Hawkeye teased Radar, it felt real, because it was drawn from something honest, affection complicated by fatigue. The set itself became a world apart. The California hills stood in for Korea, the smell of dust and coffee mingling with the low hum of generators. Cast and crew grew close, forging bonds through endless filming and shared purpose. Alda often lingered after wrap, rewriting scenes or sharing dinner with the writers. Burghoff often left quietly, longing for stillness that fame could no longer offer. Yet through it all, the camera never lied. Every glance, every moment of comic timing revealed two performers holding up opposite ends of the same truth, that compassion and chaos can coexist. It was this balance that made MASH unforgettable. Viewers believed in their friendship because, in its earliest form, it truly existed. No one knew then how fame would change them, or how admiration could blur into strain. But in those first seasons, Alda and Burghoff built something sacred, a partnership that turned scripted lines into living emotion. They didn't just act, they bore witness to the cost of caring in a world that often forgot how. The dream was alive, fragile, and burning bright. Two men joined by art, unaware that the same fire that made them brothers would one day divide them. Fame does not arrive quietly. It seeps in, a slow current that reshapes everything it touches. By the mid-70s, MASH was no longer just a series. It was an institution, a mirror held up to a wounded America still reckoning with Vietnam. The world adored Hawkeye's wit, but it also adored the heart behind Radar O'Reilly. Viewers saw in him a gentleness the war could not corrupt. Yet behind the laughter, the bond between Alan Alda and Gary Burghoff was beginning to change. Alda had become more than an actor. He was the show's conscience. He directed, wrote, and shaped its tone with precision. Every story needed depth. Every joke needed truth. His passion was legendary. He stayed late rewriting scripts, questioning motives, demanding authenticity. But such intensity, while noble, left little room for fragility. Burghoff, more reserved, carried the weight differently. He felt the isolation of being the youngest in a cast of larger-than-life voices. He longed to protect Radar's innocence from the creeping cynicism that fame so easily breeds. On set, subtle shifts began to show. Alda's leadership could feel overwhelming, his perfectionism unrelenting. Burghoff's sensitivity made him recoil from conflict. Misunderstandings multiplied in silence. What had once been creative chemistry now sparked discomfort. The very trust that gave their scenes life began to fray under the strain of expectation. Those close to the production remembered moments that hinted at distance. During rehearsals, Alda would press for changes, dissecting dialogue with surgical focus. Burghoff, feeling unheard, would quietly withdraw. He loved the work, but he missed the simplicity. The early days when laughter came easy, and scenes flowed without weight. The tension wasn't explosive, it was weary, built on exhaustion and unspoken hurt. In truth, both men were victims of the same devotion. Alda wanted to elevate MASH beyond sitcom. Burghoff wanted to preserve its heart. Their goals were identical, their methods worlds apart. That contradiction is what made their on-screen magic so believable. Hawkeye's restless brilliance against Radar's wide-eyed wonder. But off-screen, the contrast grew sharp. Alda was always moving forward. Burghoff yearned for peace. By 1979, the emotional fatigue had become impossible to ignore. Burghoff began missing time on set, sometimes stepping away entirely. He later admitted the pressure and long hours were taking a toll on his health and family life. When he filmed Radar's farewell in Season 8, the moment felt heartbreakingly real. The tears weren't scripted, they were released. Alda stood nearby watching his friend and co-star close a chapter neither knew how to save. Rumors of resentment followed, as they often do in Hollywood. Stories of clashes, of egos, of words left hanging in the air. But those who knew them best spoke instead of quiet disappointment. Two artists who once moved in harmony, now speaking different creative languages. Alda carried on with the show until its legendary finale in 1983. Burghoff, after leaving, stepped into quieter spaces, painting, family, faith. Still, the shadow of their separation lingered in the public's imagination. Fans wanted a villain, a betrayal, but the truth was smaller, sadder, more human. It wasn't hate, it was heartbreak. The slow drift that comes when two people give everything to their craft until there's nothing left for each other. Years later, Alda would reflect on the show's legacy with gratitude and a trace of melancholy. Burghoff, too, would speak warmly of what they built, calling those years a blessing wrapped in pressure. The cracks had formed, but the foundation endured, a testament to a friendship that had simply run its course under the relentless light of success. When MASH finally ended in 1983, The world stood still for a moment. Over 100 million people watched the finale, their tears mingling with laughter as the chopper lifted away. For many, it felt like saying goodbye to family. But for Alan Alda and Gary Burghoff, that farewell carried a weight no audience could feel, a goodbye that had begun long before the cameras rolled for the last time. The end of the show marked triumph for Alda. He had directed the most-watched television episode in history, earning awards, admiration, and the rare respect of peers who knew how impossible such a legacy was to build. Yet when the applause faded, something quieter remained. The absence of certain faces, the echo of a voice that once filled the set with warmth. Gary Burghoff's chair, long empty, seemed to whisper reminders of what had been lost in the climb toward perfection. Burghoff's life after MASH took a different turn. He stepped away from Hollywood's noise, retreating into painting, music, and faith. He had once described acting as both a gift and a burden, a paradox he could no longer carry. His exit had been written with tenderness, but behind that storyline lay years of emotional fatigue. The laughter that had once defined radar had dimmed beneath the pressure of fame and the strain of being everyone's moral compass. For Burghoff, leaving was not rejection, it was survival. Alda understood that kind of exhaustion better than most. In his drive to honor truth in storytelling, he had often missed the truth in people's silences. He had watched colleagues break under the weight of expectation, had seen how the spotlight could warm and wound in equal measure. By the time MASH ended, Alda himself was weary. Proud, yes, but changed. The show had demanded everything from him. In giving it, he had lost something intangible, the easy camaraderie of those early days when the work felt lighter and the friendships less fragile. The years that followed carried both men down separate paths. Burghoff's reclusive peace contrasted with Alda's public presence, directing, advocating for science communication, and confronting illness with openness and grace. But whenever MASH resurfaced in reruns or retrospectives, fans could feel what had once bound them together. Their scenes, filled with humor and sincerity, still pulsed with emotional truth. That chemistry could not be fabricated. It was born of something real, something that had survived even through misunderstanding. There were no grand reconciliations, no public apologies, no dramatic reunions. Instead, time worked quietly, sanding away the sharp edges of old tension. Alda spoke fondly of the cast, whenever asked, always describing them as family. Burghoff, though often private, echoed similar gratitude in later interviews, calling his MASH years some of the best of his life. Between the lines you could sense affection, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. For the fans, the distance between them became part of the legend. The rumors of hate, of rivalries, of creative war, all melted away when one looked closer at the truth. What remained was something more tragic and tender. Two men who had simply outgrown each other's orbit. They had built something immortal together, but like all great partnerships, it was bound by its time. And perhaps that is why their story endures. Because behind every perfect scene lies the imperfect humanity of those who created it. The silence after the applause isn't empty, it's sacred. It holds the memories of shared laughter, unspoken forgiveness, and the knowledge that some bonds, though fractured, never truly fade. As the years unfurled, the myth of MASH only grew stronger. New generations discovered it, drawn to its rare balance of humor and heartbreak. The show's humanity seemed timeless, a mirror held up to both war and the everyday struggles of decency. For Alan Alda, watching its continued life became both humbling and bittersweet. The stories he once fought to tell had outlived him in their own way, but when he looked back, what struck him most wasn't the fame or the awards, it was the people. The laughter between takes, the weight of unspoken things, the faces that shaped his own evolution, especially Gary Burghoff's. Time has a way of softening sharp memories. In interviews decades later, Alda spoke not as the commanding presence of Mash, but as a man humbled by perspective. He often reflected on how collaboration demands vulnerability, how the best art is born not from control, but from trust. And that realization, though quiet, carried the echo of something long left unsaid. Perhaps the tension with Burghoff had been less about rivalry and more about reflection. Two men mirroring each other's intensity, their shared passion both forging and fracturing what they created together. Burghoff, for his part, had stepped far from the spotlight, choosing instead a slower, more spiritual life. He painted scenes of nature, played jazz in small circles, and found solace in family. To those who asked about Mash, he spoke without bitterness. His departure had not been about hate, he would say, it had been about exhaustion, about the quiet need to rediscover himself away from fame's consuming glare. His honesty gave fans a glimpse of the truth beneath the myth, that greatness often asks for more than it returns, and sometimes the kindest thing one can do is walk away. There's something profoundly human in that symmetry. Alda, the restless visionary, who stayed until the end. Burghoff, the gentle soul who knew when to leave. Both choices carried cost. Both were rooted in love for the same work. And when time stripped away misunderstanding, what remained was not animosity, but gratitude. Gratitude for the years that shaped them, for the characters who gave them immortality, and for the strange alchemy that made their partnership unforgettable. Alda once said that comedy and tragedy are siblings, each revealing truth in a different disguise. Perhaps that's why MASH endures. Beneath the laughter, it was always about survival, of spirit, of conscience, of compassion. The same resilience ran through Alda and Burghoff's story. What began as friction became, over time, a testament to endurance. Proof that respect can outlast misunderstanding when both hearts are honest. In their twilight years, both men became symbols of grace. Alda, facing Parkinson's disease with disarming openness, turned his pain into advocacy, teaching others how to live with dignity. Burghoff, long removed from Hollywood, carried peace in his art, reminding the world that purpose does not end when fame fades. And in that balance, one public, one private, their legacies intertwined once more, quietly healing what history had once dramatized. Fans who revisit MASH today don't just see characters, they see fragments of truth. Hawkeye's wit, Radar's innocence, both reflections of the men who gave them life. The scenes linger not because they were perfect, but because they were real. Through laughter and heartbreak, through rivalry and redemption, they told the story of two artists learning, across years and distance, that forgiveness need not be spoken to be felt. The story of Alan Alda and Gary Burghoff did not end with the final shot of MASH. It lived on in quiet reflections, in reruns watched by generations, and in the shared memory of a partnership that had shaped television history. Time had a way of reshaping what once seemed irreconcilable. The tension, the whispered rumors of rivalry, even the exhaustion that once carved distance between them, all of it transformed under the patient hand of perspective. What remained was not anger, nor regret, but a profound acknowledgement of what had been built together. Alda, whose dedication had driven the show's moral and emotional compass, often spoke of MASH as more than entertainment. It was a commitment to truth, to the human heart in crisis, to laughter that could heal. Burghoff, whose performance embodied innocence and empathy, had retreated from fame but carried those years with quiet dignity. Together, they had navigated the fragile intersection of art and life, a place where the weight of expectation can strain even the strongest bonds. The friction that had once seemed insurmountable had ultimately become a silent testament to their devotion to craft. Fans who had speculated about feuds, who had dramatized tension into scandal, could finally see a different story. The hatred they imagined had never been hate at all. It had been intensity, pressure, and the unspoken desire to protect something precious. Alda's careful leadership, Burghoff's tender instincts, when viewed with clarity, revealed a partnership both human and heroic. They had been imperfect, fallible, and yet, in that imperfection, wholly authentic. Decades later, when retrospectives brought the cast together, there were no grand apologies or declarations. What existed was something subtler, more enduring respect. In quiet glances, in reminiscence of the long hours on set, and in the acknowledgement of sacrifices made for art, a reconciliation of spirit had occurred. Alda's public advocacy, his willingness to share vulnerability, and Burghoff's dedication to a life of meaning and privacy all reflected a shared lesson, that what endures is not the conflict itself, but the way understanding follows it. The legacy of their collaboration now transcends television. It resides in every viewer moved by Hawkeye and Radar, in every performance shaped by authenticity, and in every creative partnership that survives trials, not by the absence of friction, but through the presence of care. Alda and Burghoff's story reminds us that human relationships, no matter how strained by circumstance, hold the potential for quiet redemption. It teaches that the truth, when finally seen, has power far beyond rumor or spectacle. And so the image endures: two men once divided by strain and expectation, whose shared devotion rose above misunderstanding. What they created together still speaks, not in headlines, not in gossip, but in the quiet power of craft, in the moments of truth captured on screen. Their respect, their care for the work and for each other, remains unshakable, a reminder that legacy is measured not by fame, but by the enduring bonds forged in honesty, dedication, and the art they loved. For more emotional stories, check out this video.